Hey, I'm Stephen Sashen from XeroShoes.com, and I'm doing a meta review here. In other words, I'm going to be reviewing a review about a movie that's coming out on December 15th, and then I'll come back and do the actual review of the movie. But I think it's important to do the review of the review. I mean, it's always silly to complain about something or comment about something you haven't seen, but in this case, you'll see that it's useful. And obviously, what we're talking about is this movie, The Infinite Race. It's going to be on ESPN's 30 by 30, and this new film debunks the Tarahumara myth. Okay, very interesting. I'm all about debunking. I debunk the idea that you need to run in big, thick, padded, motion-controlled footwear, and of course, the Tarahumara were part of the inspiration for what we're doing. I'll talk about that in a second. But let's see. Now, underneath the headline, The Infinite Race examines the complicated relationship between Born to Run and the runners the book made famous. Okay, so this is a very different thing than debunking a myth. Look, I'm the first to admit that when human beings find a person or a group of people who are doing something interesting, admirable, exceptional, that we will often try to simplify the story to understand it and glean something from it, and that the people in that group may have a different experience of what's going on, and there may be disagreements within the group itself. So this will be interesting to see where it goes. I've already read this, so I know some of where it goes. So let's jump in, shall we? All right, I'm going to scroll and scroll and scroll. So this is from Martin Huber, who makes a comment that he eventually decided to try natural movement running, quote, barefoot running. Of course, he did it by buying a pair of shoes, which is not the same as running barefoot. And he spent $160 on a pair of shoes, he said, that mimicked the sensation of running barefoot. So look, I sell natural movement footwear. Nothing mimics the sensation of running barefoot. Only barefoot gives you the sensation of running barefoot. What we do over here, and those of us who do natural movement footwear, we try to give you the closest thing to a barefoot-like experience, not interfering with what the foot does naturally, bending, flexing, moving, and feeling as much as possible, while still getting protection from the ground and whatever other benefits you might need from that. But also, $160, I don't even know what he bought, because I don't even know of a shoe that's $160. I mean, our top selling running shoe is $90. So anyway, moving on, he did this, blah, 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 blah. He says, after a few weeks, however, I became disillusioned. The anticipated breakthrough in my running never came. Well, I'm really confused by this right off the bat, because first of all, what anticipated breakthrough? Those of us who do this never made any comments about anticipated breakthroughs. We say that running naturally, getting your feet underneath you, landing in the proper place, having the right cadence, etc., can be beneficial in various ways, but I'm not sure about a breakthrough. Now, there are people who report setting personal bests, having major improvements in various things related to health, etc. Daniel Lieberman talks about how force is reduced when you take off your shoes, but again, he's in a pair of shoes. And Irene Davis at Harvard, her research shows there's truly minimalist shoes and shoes sold as minimalist that don't actually provide those benefits. So I once again wonder what he was wearing. But even more, if there's going to be a breakthrough, a few weeks, is that long enough for whatever breakthrough he was imagining? I don't know, hard to comment, but it is kind of interesting. I love this next line. What's more, none of the top professionals seem to be ditching their plush footwear and going minimalist. Two things about this, maybe three. Thing number one, professional runners are paid to wear the shoes they're wearing. End of story. So if a major shoe company is not making a truly minimalist shoe, they would never ditch their shoe because they wouldn't have the opportunity to. Secondly, I've even said this to professional runners, don't do anything different than what you're currently doing if it might jeopardize your livelihood. Making a major change is a silly thing to do when your livelihood depends on it. The third thing is a lot of professional runners are already minimalists. So especially track runners, sprinters, 100 meter, 200 meter, 400 meter, 800 meter, up to the mile, sometimes even more. They're already wearing shoes that are low to the ground, super, super flexible, super lightweight. They squeeze your toes together too much typically, and they're too narrow in many other ways. But fundamentally, they're closer to barefoot than anything else. So there is that. The seismic influence of Born to Run haunts the Infinite Race. Seismic influence. If you ask the most people on the planet about the book Born to Run, they'll think you're talking about the Bruce Springsteen album. I don't know that there was a seismic influence. The number of people who really made changes as a result of that, reading that book, I mean, did for me, of course, but it's not seismic by any stretch of the imagination. Directed by Bernardo Ruiz, that's great. Leans heavily on first-hand accounts from Tarahumara, that's great. Again, if you happen to be one of the 10 people who didn't read McDougall's book, it's ridiculous. Yes, it was a New York Times bestseller. That doesn't mean you sold a boatload of books, frankly. It's way less than people think, and most people have never read this book. Anyway, we'll move down here. the feats of endurance have been relentlessly mythologized. Again, I'm not sure about that, but so be it. And among other things, the infinite race seeks to de-exoticize its subject. I'm all for that. Many of these things are more complex than human beings would like them to be. So that would be great. Let's see if we can add some nuance and complexity to this situation. I'd love to see it. Late in the film, there's a scene where Silvino is watching footage of Chris McDougall jogging barefoot. I don't know what they're thinking. Why would they want to run barefoot? I think they're crazy. Well, A, cool. B, who gives a crap? I mean, people do lots of things. Look, people here think that what the Tarahumara do running in sandals is just as crazy. And people conflate running in sandals with running barefoot. That's a whole other thing. So why do they want to run barefoot? Why wouldn't you? It's fun. It feels good. You can learn about your form and ways that transferred if you decide to wear shoes. It's about the form, not the footwear, but the footwear informs the form. Lots of research that shows how that's true. So let's see. While he's incredulous that anyone with the means to purchase functional running shoes would willingly go without, well, let's stop there. In many cultures, especially poorer cultures, shoes are a luxury. They're a status symbol. And the Tarahumara make their huaraches with, strips of used tire and some lace to hold it on, leather lace to hold it on, because that's one of the materials that are available. They can't afford expensive shoes. So it's an interesting perspective that's shared by other cultures, like in Africa. It's like, why would you not wear shoes if you can afford shoes and have the status of wearing shoes? So again, but why he's incredulous that anyone would do it. Again, lots of reasons to do it, to learn about how to run properly by getting the feedback that you need to adjust your gait to the form that might be beneficial. Then talking to Irma Chavez, she regards the barefoot running industry as an insult. First of all, I'm not sure there's a barefoot running industry. If you're talking about actual barefoot, there are a couple of people who made some money, not very much, doing workshops. There are a couple of people who made some money, not very much, who wrote books after Born to Run. So the industry, what we're doing, the industry, there's like a half a dozen companies who do what we're doing, and we are an ant at the foot of a elephant worth of footwear companies. So I'm not sure that we're an industry. And then it's an insult, an attempt to profit off a misconception. This is the best part, that the Tarahumara run with minimalist sandals because of alleged performance benefits rather than necessity. So if you don't know what a straw man argument is, I'm about to tell you. Let's use a weird example. Let's say someone said that they don't believe the pictures of people on the moon, or they believe the pictures of people on the moon were faked by NASA. Okay? Now, there are a couple of responses you could have. The best would be, why do you think that? Where did you get that information? And is there any conflicting information that may show that you may be mistaken, or it might be a little more nuanced than you think? A bad response is, hey, you're a moron. Because that's an ad hominem attack. That's just attacking the person instead of addressing their argument. But here's what a straw man is. A straw man is basically a fake person. So you set up a fake person and argue with that fake person instead of the real person. Here's how we create the fake person in this situation. That person, that friend of yours who said he thinks the NASA photos are faked, didn't say that we didn't land on the moon. He just said that the photos are faked. So if we set up a straw man, someone who believes we didn't land on the moon, and argue with that person about whether we landed on the moon, you're not arguing with the actual person about the actual topic. So back to this. A misconception that the Tarahumara run with minimalist sandals because of alleged performance benefits rather than necessity. No one ever said that. Ever. Now, what people have said, what's in Born to Run, is that there are performance benefits from doing what they're doing, but not that they're doing it for the performance benefits. And this is a critical distinction to make. Because if we're going to debunk this myth, then if this is part of the myth, there's nothing to debunk because it's a straw man. No one ever said that. So then Chavez says this is consistent with a legacy of external forces projecting their narrative. Even the name Tarahumara came from the conquistadors. Well, okay. We have two employees who come from this region of Mexico who refer to themselves as Tarahumara. In the trailer for the 30 by 30 documentary, they refer to themselves as the Tarahumara, not the Raramuri. Now, when people went down and met the Tarahumara, Chris McDougall, Caballo Blanco, his name was Micah True, this is how they got introduced. When the Tarahumara came up and ran the Leadville 100, for example, they introduced themselves as Tarahumara. So no one made this up, and no one was trying to be imposing or politically incorrect. The thing with political incorrectness is that often you're being politically incorrect out of ignorance, not out of any malice, and until someone points it out, you don't know. So, happy to, change things with more information. Running, on the other hand, is essential, though traditional Tarahumara races are collaborative efforts. And again, this was actually described in the book, that the races were not competitions. They were an expression of joy, an expression of breaking out of imposition. They were many, many things, not really a competition the way we think of competition. There are, and again, this is for traditional races, what happened after Born to Run was non-traditional races came into this, in part because the Tarahumara had already left the Chihuahua region of Mexico and come out and done races and kicked everyone's butt. So, that was clearly not a collaborative effort. There was a reason that they came out and ran those races. I don't claim to know what it is, but again, this story is a little more nuanced than even this review or the movie is trying to make it seem. It would seem. It suggested what we're looking at is not a competition of actions of preservation, right? Which is fine. I have no problem with that. Running is our resistance to imposition. And this goes on about the very, very challenging situation that's happening in the Copper Canyon, where there are drug cartels, there's famine, there's drought, there's poverty, there's health issues, there's a lot of things, which is why since day one, since we were inspired by Born to Run and the Tarahumara, we started out as a barefoot sandal making company with sandals inspired by the Tarahumara huaraches. We have donated a percentage of our revenue on certain products to the Tarahumara Children's Hospital Fund to try to help in whatever way we can from the distance that we have, unfortunately. Menacing than the drug runners. Is the incentives the uptick in ultra running tourism. So look, this is one of those things that I totally get, where people get an idea about what's going on. Like Caballo Blanco put on a race. That was the one that's talked about in Born to Run. And before his death and then subsequent to his death, other races have transpired. And I can totally get how when a whole bunch of foreigners come in without really caring about the culture or the history of the area, but they're coming in to do this race with some or against some people who they think are going to kick their butt, or they want to learn more about running well or about the Tarahumara, that can create some conflict. I totally get that. And Americans in particular, we get kind of rude when we're out in foreign countries and think everyone should be this way. Not everyone feels the same way. So the dilemma at the heart of the Infinite Race is whether the fundraising initiatives and positive impact of the Ultra on the economy has forced the region to sell some of its soul. It's a really good question that, frankly, is completely independent of everything prior to this about why they run, how they run, what they wear, et cetera, et cetera. This is an important thing, and I think is a really interesting thing to explore, and I can only hope that the documentary itself really dives into this more than the misconceptions and the straw men. So going on. I don't know if there's anything else, but I wrote some notes about what I wanted to talk about. That's kind of all about it until we get down to drug problems. And then there's a thing. Likewise, the Infinite Race can be viewed as an attempt to reclaim part of the Tarahumara myth. It's actually not a myth at that point on behalf of the Raramri. It's not a myth if they're reclaiming actual parts of their experience and story. I think that's great. There's something in here that I don't like. Where did it go? McDougall says he discovered the Tarahumara. And again, this is where I think this review, and maybe the movie, I don't know yet, is creating false controversy, because Chris McDougall, who, by the way, I had an email volley with him, and his comment was, I stand by the book. I don't need to really respond to this, which I totally understand. He would never believe that he discovered the Tarahumara as if they were hiding somewhere and he was the first person to ever find them. You say that in the same way, you discover a movie that everyone else has already seen. It's a personal discovery. It's a revelation for you. You learn something new. He's not trying to imply that he is some great benevolent, something white, whatever, white hope, discovered these downtrodden people. It was just a personal discovery for him. And when he refers to it as a Smithsonian exhibit come to life, he was not trying to be derogatory or critical. It's simply that the people that he met in the Copper Canyon lived in a way that was in certain ways preserved by its let's say preserved by its isolation and forced to remain kind of the way it is because of things like the drug trafficking, the drought, and the poverty. So again, maybe an ineloquent choice of words, but to hone in on that without understanding the bigger picture is also not really fair, let's say. And here we go. And yet, the documentary is less a dreary sermon about the perils of cultural appropriation, so much as a reminder there's always another side of the story. Now, this says it all, because if we look at that last sentence, clearly everything prior to that is just hyperbole to get clicks to this. And frankly, hopefully to get clicks to this and views for the movie, because I'm hoping the movie does, like I said at the beginning, add context and nuance and make this more valuable for everybody involved. So stay tuned for part 2, the review of the actual movie.